Hello guys, it's Matt with Extant Labs. Today I wanted to give you a quick rundown on how I clean and maintain my Sig P320 that I use for USPSA competition. It's pretty much stock except for this Almacoal custom grip and some Dawson sights. Other than that, it's a stock weapon. So first thing we're going to do is check and make sure it is unloaded, which it is. The things that we're going to need to clean today are bore snake, brush, sometimes use a little punch or a pick, often use Q-tips, and sometimes some patches. And I'm going to be lubricating it today with Alpha Sauce. This is our competition lubricant. Has a very fine texture, especially good with 1911 platforms, things with very tight tolerances and finely polished surfaces. But it's a great all-around lubricant, and I like it for my competition guns. So first thing we're going to do is break it down. You want to lock the slide back like so. Flip that lever, and that'll come right off. So in here is your fire control group. I like to go ahead and take that out every time I do a field strip. So you simply pull out your takedown pin, and then this whole thing will lift out of the chassis. So one great thing about the 320 is that this is your gun, legally speaking, and so you could buy other chassis or other grip modules on the internet, no problem, and you know, modify them, switch them out, try different things. So I really like the way they set that up, where this is your actual gun, and all these other parts are unregulated. Anyway, taking apart the slide, first thing you do is pull out the recoil spring, and then your barrel, and then there's your field stripped slide. Maybe in another video I'll detail pulling these components out, but these have a lot of fiddly little parts right in here, and so I don't like to go to the trouble to strip all that out every time. So I don't detail strip the slide beyond that. So the first thing I want to do is just check out the barrel, and give it a little wipe down. And we'll pull the snake through it a few times just to make sure that bore gets good and clean. Now, this snake does have a little oil on it. I keep a little oil right here near the tail, so that as I'm pulling that snake through, it's just leaving a nice film on whatever I run it through. So it kind of cleans and lubricates at the same time. Although your bore honestly doesn't need much lube, it really just needs to be cleaned and have a thin film of oil on it for corrosion protection. Okay, that looks good. Now we just need to make sure our breech is clean. Which is pretty clean to begin with. But some of these little nooks and crannies can pick up a little bit of carbon, so I just like to run through there. And then one thing I'll do is just swirl a little oil around very lightly in the chamber, and that just helps with reliable feeding and extraction, especially if you're using Alpha Sauce or Echo 2.5. You'll get some of these micro ball bearings in the chamber, and they will really help with some anti-seize in that chamber area, keep brass from getting stuck, and making sure they pull out cleanly. So barrel looks good. Recoil spring, you really just wipe it off. It'll get enough oil on it. Just during operation. Most I ever do is I'll just put a couple of drops along it, along the length of it, and then as it cycles, that gets distributed. And all that really needs is a film. It doesn't require a lot of lubrication. The fire control unit here, I'll usually just wipe it down with a rag on the outside. Make sure my these little tabs, that's where your slide rides. You just want to make sure that those are clean. Carbon tends to get up behind those tabs. Another place is behind the trigger bar thing here. You just want to make sure that that's as clean as you can get it, because having grime in these in between these surfaces kind of gives it a gritty feel. So, and then I'll always pop a little oil. Right there too. Also, so you see, you just actuate the trigger, you can see all the parts that rub together, and that gives you a good idea of where you need cleaning and lube, especially on just an ordinary field strip. So I'll put a little bit right there and kind of work that in, and then all these surfaces that interface with the striker and that move around during the cycle. Get a couple of little drops on that little guy, just a little bit there. And with these, it's you can really feel it when you get the lube in the right spot. Everything really smooths out. And so I'll just keep putting little tiny drops in those neighborhoods where I see moving parts, and this really applies to any gun. And just keep working it until everything gets nice and smooth. And that's how you know you've got the oil in the right spot. At least that's how I like to know, especially with, you know, there's a lot of little moving parts in here, and you can't really get to all of them precisely. So when you just keep working it and you keep putting tiny drops of oil wherever you see movement, eventually it works its way in there. So that is sufficient for routine cleaning. So we'll set that aside with our other clean parts. As for the slide itself, there are a few places you want to give special attention, and that would be these rails down either side. You just want to wipe through and make sure you get all that carbon crud out of there. But if you're using a good oil, it'll help make that easier to clean, and you're not going to have a lot of carbon scale formation. It's going to keep it soft, especially if you're using Echo 2.5 with the gel. So that's what I use on my carry weapons, and that gel really keeps that carbon soft and loose. And the way they milled these things, there are a lot of little grooves and channels and all kind of stuff in here. So I just try to take enough time to really get in there. And when you look down in there, you can kind of see some spots where the finish gets worn during normal use. That tells you exactly where you need to lubricate. So if you have, 500,000 rounds through it, you're going to start to see those patterns, and that's really going to tell you, lube exactly there. I don't like to run over lubricated gun, so I use it sparingly, and I put it where I know it's needed. So that's those surfaces that are starting to get a little bit of that normal cosmetic wear on them. It's a really good indicator. And there's just because you have that wear, there's nothing wrong with the gun. That's normal. So another good spot to get in there with that flannel patch is right there inside the muzzle area. Same deal. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but right up in there's going to be some places where the barrel rides on that slide, and where it's been honed and fitted. And so you just want to make sure there's a little oil in there. And so I'll just use that needle tip to put it in the right spot, and then I'll kind of wipe it around in there. And that gives you a really good solid surface of oil there. And then I'll always do drop of oil there, put a drop of oil here in the striker assembly. One thing you always want to do is make sure the face of your extractor is clean, so it can get a good positive lock on that cartridge. So that's where your dental pick comes in handy. So I'll just kind of go in there like that, just to loosen it up, and then I'll come in there with a brush, brush it out, give it a little wipe down in there, put a patch on the brush, just making sure you collect that carbon that gets accumulated in those areas, because that's really where you need some positive lockup with that rim of that cartridge for the gun to function properly. So you want to make sure those parts are good and free of carbon buildup. And so after you've done that, I do a drop of oil on the extractor, and then I put a drop on that face there, and just sort of rub it around and create a film. Also, I'll do a drop right behind the extractor on the outside. And that just makes sure everything's moving freely. And as far as routine maintenance, that's all I really do for the slide. And the fire control unit, barrel and spring. Those are your basic parts. So once you have them all lubed up and relatively clean, we start putting it back together. So the first thing we're going to do is put the fire control unit in there. So I don't know if you saw how I did that. Put the trigger in first, and then the tail of it here second, and then push that down third. And so when you're putting the takedown lever back in, there's a little polished down edge right there. And so that's going to help you get it past this little detent bar. So sometimes I'll have to kind of turn it and wiggle it to get it in the right spot. But eventually it'll get in there. You just keep working it. Sometimes it's a pain. There we go. So, and then you just want to make sure you return it to that open position like that. So that closed, open. It's not going to go back together unless it's open. Oh yeah, we do need to lube a few spots out here on the outside of the chamber. Just make sure everything's moving real nice and freely. And then the barrel, you can see how well this barrel, the finish on this barrel is being preserved by the alpha sauce. I've got, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 rounds through this barrel, and there is no wear on the finish of this barrel at all. So I'll just, the way I run it is just with a film of the alpha sauce on it. Just make sure you got a good film. And right up in there where it's riding on the slide, that's where you're going to get barrel wear. On that finish is going to be right there. But so far I don't have any. So the spring goes in with this little rectangular bit toward the muzzle. So don't try to put your spring in backwards. It's bad news. And so the spring, do it again in case you didn't see that, goes in there first and then pops down onto that tab on the barrel. And now your slide is reassembled. Just for ease of assembly, make sure your spring is centered. If it's not centered, it can get caught on the way in and give you all kind of problems when you're trying to put the slide back on. So just take a second to make sure everything's centered up and everything's fully in battery, and so it'll slide together easily. So okay, takedown lever is in the open position. Just gonna line it up on the tabs there, slide it on, lock it back using that slide lock. If you don't lock that back, it's just gonna spring off again. So make sure it's locked back, then you can flip that lever to the closed position, and now you're back together, ready to go. Thanks for watching.